Good evening. We are live.
We are live, and we had no one waiting for us.
No one. Oh, well. We'll say hello to everyone in the future who's watching
The future, Conan?
us. tell us
Yes,
about
indeed,
the
the future. The
tell us
year
about the
2000.
future, people. Do you have flying cars out
Hmm.
there in the future? Because as I was signing up for stream, as I was signing into StreamYard today, it was like, don't forget to greet your viewers in the future. I was like, ooh, the future. We all want to know
all,
about the future.
all the way in the year 2000.
Hmm. I just hope my stream is okay tonight because all of a sudden, around 4 o'clock, I was getting 1 megabyte per second upload speed. I was like,
Yay.
"Oh, that's not good." As I was trying to email files. Good evening, Tit Goblin. How are you tonight?
And we are not alone.
Yes, you've got someone. And Wilson may be with us tonight.
Hmm.
And we now have 4 people on the Chris Geruso list, which is Daisy, Chris, Jeff, who's been here before, and Randy, who hasn't been here before. They'll show up whenever they show up. We don't know. Like Chris showed up last week at some time.
Well, if Chris shows up, you can complain about the latest Rob Liefeld image.
Greetings, luminous, cavernous luminaries. I actually had something to say about that because that got me thinking. There was, for those of you who missed out on this week's comic book Tempest in a Teapot, it was Rob Liefeld I guess he homaged one of his own covers, and Don Simpson, the cartoonist of Megaton Man and other things, was just happened to see it, and it just rubbed him the wrong way, and he said something like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this might be the worst cover I've ever seen." Of course, that got people all out defending Rob Liefeld and bashing Rob Liefeld, and Don Simpson said he wasted too much time on an offhanded comment.
Well, Venom does look freaky.
It was not, it was fun. I had just seen a few because I follow Rob on. There's Wilson. Good evening, Wilson. How are you doing this evening?
Hey,
Hey, gentlemen, hello.
We were just discussing the latest Tempest in a Teapot in the comics world. I thought the Liefeld cover was freaky, so freaky that I almost liked it. When Rob Liefeld did a cover, which was an homage, a variant cover that was an homage to some other cover he did. I don't even remember. But Don Simpson, the cartoonist of Megaton Man, happened to bemoan how bad the cover was, and he couldn't believe that this cover was, this cover existed. And I actually looked at the cover and went, wow, that's a pretty bad cover. After having just seen Rob Liefeld's sketch covers and said to myself just this week, well, these ones are not bad. I'm not a huge Liefeld fan, but I looked at the covers and went, these sketch covers are not bad. But the homage cover he did, I can see why Don Simpson complained about it, but it brought out all the people defending Rob Liefeld and all the people attacking Rob Liefeld, and Don Simpson eventually was like, I've just wasted my time with this. But it got me to think because I find Rob Liefeld's art intriguing. Just because I'm not a fan of it, but so many people are. And I'm always kind of trying to see what they see.
It is there's a lot of back and forth I've had over the years with
Yeah.
fandom and Rob Liefeld. When he came onto the scene, to me, yes, it was something different, something a lot of energy during a
I
time
never even
period.
saw that. That never even struck me.
I
I
was
know when people say that, I know what they're talking about, but that never even appealed to me, whatever energy he had.
right.
But I was
Um,
so out of superhero comics that it wasn't going to appeal to me.
So to me, it's like that was something that I saw, something that that I could see the appeal because I was working in a comic book shop at the
Right.
time, and I saw how the kids were attracted to it.
Right.
I was not as much. I found
Right.
it interesting. I was more of a fan of Todd McFarlane
Mm-hmm.
for the same type of energy. I just felt at that time it was just a different energy. So I was very cynical back then. Not
Mm-hmm.
that I'm any better now. Well, very cynical back then, and my go-to joke was the kids love him because he's drawing like they are, or they're drawing like he is. If he can make it, we can all make it.
there,
That
there
was
is
my
some
that
there
was
is some
my
truth to that.
go-to to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually my mind has switched to the sense of I am impressed of the amount of work he's been able to put out.
I
Good
think
or
if you
bad, it was just amazing that he's done that much work in his career.
yeah.
And now, granted, there is something to be said about being a lucky SOB that happened to be at the right
Right.
places at the right time. That, the whole image thing wasn't him pushing it, he was
Right.
part of that ride. He
Right.
was lucky to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And, but he's also done good things in the sense of hiring so many people. He
Yeah.
tended to hire people that drew like him.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this kind of uh I wouldn't even know what to call that. It's just that he's doing something good in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come to respect him in that portion of the amount of work he was doing and stuff like that. I saw a very little of what was going back and forth with Don and him. I only saw something about the splitting image
And
um
I saw very
scene.
little too. It was the same. That what I saw was the same stuff you always see.
Right.
You
So
know,
it's like
there's.
Don, I know Don through projects that I've done with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm biased towards Don.
Right.
Rob and we never meshed. We talked maybe 3 times in my whole career.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's one of those things where I had, in a sense, closed that chapter on the hate on Rob
Yeah.
because it was the same argument over and
Right.
over again.
There's no
So
point to it for
there's
me.
nothing new to it. There's no point
Right.
to it. And then I do enjoy when he does make fun of himself, especially with that Pouches character that he drew up, and I
Yeah.
thought that was funny.
I don't think he has enough self awareness to really be. He doesn't really make fun of himself. He says, "Look, I'm right. Everybody loves Pouches. Here's Mr. Pouches." So I dispute that he makes fun of himself only because he really doesn't have. I don't think he's got that much self awareness.
Okay,
So,
probably. Yeah, and again, it's like I could
but
only
I
see the
like him
things
on
that he
Twitter.
posts of.
I generally like him on Twitter. Like I said, I follow him on. He's one of the few people I follow. I generally like him on Twitter because I think he's got a much better grasp than me of pop culture and what's popular. So that's what I look to him for. I think if you were 11 when Rob Liefeld out, you would get him. See, I don't know if I would get him when I was 11. I was 30, so he puzzles me. He puzzles me too.
I was what 14 or 15, and
Yeah.
the first story he drew was the one from Acts of Vengeance, where Rusty fights the Vulture, and I
Mhm.
found that odd.
Right.
Not that I ever really liked Brett Blevins on New Mutants,
Right.
but I did not consider Rob Liefeld a step up. But then I liked Cable's first issue, so okay.
Hmm.
I think the problem with all of this exchange is that apparently there's a new generation of people out there who have never heard of Don Simpson,
Yeah.
and they were saying
That's
they
true.
were, they were more like, "Who are you to criticize Rob Liefeld? I've never heard of you."
Right. Right. There was a lot of that going on, I'm sure. But
That
here's
was
the
not the case with Dan Frege, but Frege was always going to defend Liefeld because he worked for him
right.
at Extreme Studios.
But here's my new thought I had about um, comics art in general, which actually makes Rob Liefeld even more of an outlier in my mind in terms of um, the word sophisticated. When it comes to comic book artwork, I think Rob's work in general is unsophisticated. No, I don't mean that as an insult. I'm just saying sophisticated is something that's sort of refined and thought about. And you can tell work that is not as thought about. It's more instinctual. Or they're not interested in educating themselves. And if I were to describe comic art, some of the most popular art is sophisticated, but if you get too sophisticated, you risk becoming an artist's artist. Like Alex Toth is one of the most sophisticated artists out there, but he's not especially popular because his art is so sophisticated, even though it looks simple, that if you're not kind of sophisticated with him and educated in that, you tend not to respond to it. So I think so I think like artists are always trying to get sophisticated, i.e., think about their art and bring it to the next level kind of thing. Like Todd McFarlane, I think his art always had a certain sophistication to it. It had some unsophistication to it. It's like not one or the other. It's a gradation once again. And like I think people liked some people liked McFarlane better because his art was more sophisticated. You could see him thinking about things and improving and doing things in a certain way, but then he kind of stopped. But what's weird about Liefeld is, like I think his work was generally unsophisticated in that he wasn't thinking about it deeply. He was just kind of acting and going by gut instinct. But what's strange is usually comic book fans don't like unsophisticated art. You can easily be too, and I think that's what happens to a lot of guys is that some guys starting out, their work is unsophisticated and not thought about deeply, and they think that's bad. They don't react to it well. Or there's guys like, I think Steve Ditko, his later work got less and less sophisticated. He stopped thinking about it and just started and I think that's why later Ditko isn't as like Ditko from the late 80s into the 90s isn't as respected as 50s, 60s, and 70s Ditko because it got unsophisticated, which I think is sort of a thing that happens to comic book. Like I think John Byrne is the same way. I think his art got less sophisticated as he got older, and that's why a lot of people now put down John Byrne and don't like John Byrne or fell off the John Byrne bandwagon because he kind of figured out how to draw pages in the least amount of time he could, understandable because it's a job. But I think that made his work less sophisticated. And I think that happens to comic book artists over time as they kind of like Jim Apato's work in the 80s when he stopped drawing backgrounds. If you look at Jim Aparo work from like the mid to late 80s, he could still draw, but his work became less and less sophisticated, and people liked it less and less. What's strange about Rob Liefeld and makes him even more of an outlier is I think his work was also unsophisticated, but he was beloved. It didn't matter. And I think what it is when I look at Rob Liefeld's work, all I can see is the unsophisticated parts. Mm-hmm. All I can see are the parts where I go, oh my God, he should have thought about that more. But other people don't see what they see is the parts they like. What they see is the cool cross hatching and the big guns and the hulking figures. And then that's what so it's like we're seeing, I see the unsophisticated parts and it bothers me. They don't see that. That doesn't bother them at all. They see the cool parts that they like. So I think that's the divide on Rob Liefeld. And he's the only one that's kind of like that. That's what makes it so strange.
Sure. I think regarding Burton, I don't see any problem with being more economic if it still produces the same effect. I don't think that Burton loses in storytelling, and
I think he loses in drawing though, because and I'm just going by what I've heard about. I mean, I haven't paid attention to John Byrne in a lot of years because I found his art unappealing after a while, and I think one of the reasons that the difference between, let's say, John Byrne and Alex Toth is to get to Alex Toth's level of sophistication, it takes thinking and repetition. Alex Toth could draw a moody, you could say he spent his career thinking about how to draw a moody figure in the fewest amount of lines. And it wasn't because he wanted to cut down on his workload. That's actually more work to do all that thinking and figure it out. I think John Byrne thought about how he could make a drawing in the least amount of time. And he wasn't as interested in what that drawing had to say. I think Alex Toth was very interested in what that drawing had to say. So Byrne put in the repetition, but I don't think he put in the thinking, which made his work less sophisticated. So it's just an idea. I haven't fully thought it out yet. That's why it's the first time I thought about it was that Rob Liefeld sort of thing that went on this week.
I can see where you're going, although sometimes it may be a reflection of age. And with Ditko, it was definitely that. Because you see, the stuff that he did in 78, 79 with Captain Marvel and Machine Man, it's still very good. It's still very Ditko. It's the best that Ditko got. Some people may say Mr. A was his best work, but what he did at Marvel at 78, 79 was good. And then he flipped the switch, and by 1982, he was needing somebody to ink him. But I think the inker completely changed what Ditko was about.
I think what I mean when I say less sophisticated is exactly that. The switch was. I think Ditko, which I think it happens with age, where you get to a point where you realize all this thought I put into it amounted to nothing in terms of my career. So I think Ditko reached a point where he said, I put all my energy and all my thought into all these comics, and what did it get me? It got me the next page rate. So I may as well do these pages for the page rate. And I think he still had all his drawing talent, but I just don't think he was thinking about the work as deeply. Therefore, it became less sophisticated. And I think people reacted to it differently. That's why later Ditko, people are like, 1982 is a good year to pick. Late Ditko after 1982, people still like it because it's Ditko. They still like parts of it because they like his drawing. He can still draw, but the magic isn't there because he's not thinking about the magic anymore. I think that's what I mean by unsophisticated is Ditko's just not thinking about it the same way anymore. He's not saying, how can I do my best here to make this a really good, popular book? Because he did that for 25 years and know what it got him? The next page, broken promises and the next page rate. So it's like, I don't blame him. I'd probably do the same thing. But I think that's part. But I think that's the risk every comic book artist takes is as they get older, their work gets less sophisticated, and people like it less. And I just like it might be a natural part of aging, and especially in comics, realizing that they Scrooge over so many times. What am I going to do? Keep giving them my all? Has there been a Liefeld since Liefeld? No. The conversation about Liefeld that hasn't changed in 25 years is the one about someone new. Been out of the loop since the 90s. So no, there has not. There's never been another. That's why I find him. Greg Land seems to be the hated recent art. Yeah, I can see Greg Land get some of that, but I don't think he's nearly as beloved or hated.
The thing about Greg Land is that Greg Land is to stock photos what Lichtenstein was to comics.
Right.
and that's why it's okay to hate him.
A very clear pattern with a lot of I think that has to do with aging too. Good evening, Comic Crack.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago there was this idiot kid that started reading comics the previous week, and he had somehow he became a popular YouTube channel during that time. And he said that Gary Frank was a better artist than John Romita Jr. and that he hated John Romita Jr. We're talking about, this was about, 8 years ago. John Romita Jr. had just finished the Captain America run in Dimension Z.
Right.
And Gary Frank was drawing Superman or something. And I always found Gary Frank to be very emotionless.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And the thing is, he picked exactly the worst examples to defend to defend his opinion, because look at how Captain America here, and it was like it was kept talking to Sharon Carter, and this is an amazing piece of body language. What the hell are you talking about? Because they were talking. He had taken up the balloons, but they were leaning toward each other. And Steve Rogers, of course, being taller, he also tilted his head, and they were smiling, and they were comfortable with each other. And you could tell, Steve Rogers, Sharon Carter, longtime friends, former lovers, occasionally checking up to just for old time's sake. I can see why them like this. Yeah, they're having this. In the image you picked that was Superman for Gary Frank. Gary Frank was Superman flying. Now Gary Frank, when he did not have his own style, he had a lot of potential that he didn't take advantage of. Because I remember when he did fill-ins in the Incredible Hulk after Dale Keown left, and they weren't bad. I mean, he was obviously cloning Alan Davis, but at the time so was Brian Hitch. The thing is, Gary Frank was a more effective clone of Alan Davis in the early 90s than Brian Hitch was. I've seen something that Hitch did for Marvel UK called Mistech Wars, and I saw that after he had done The Authority, Stormwatch and The Authority. This is the guy that becomes the artist on Stormwatch and The Authority. He came a long way. Gary Frank did not. Gary Frank, in the process of becoming himself, became stilted and emotionless. While Brian Hitch was able to craft a perfect universe that you could, when they say widescreen, I did not see that as widescreen. I could feel it's being surrounding me. Even if you're just drawing the things that are in front of you, you can feel that you are in Brian Hitch's universe that he just drew. But then Hitch did something, and I don't know what he did, because Hitch never actually was that detailed when he was on The Authority. And during that period, he was doing a monthly series, and he also had time to do a fill-in on Wildcats because Travis Charest was slow, really slow. And after he left The Authority, he became much slower. He had trouble finishing a comic in 3 months. But he added absolutely nothing to his style. So I don't know exactly what he was doing.
I think I think he wrote a tweet about that this summer sometime. I don't follow him, but I ran into it somehow because they say people. I think it was Brian Hitch. What has he been doing lately? He said something about, you're right. He got paralyzed by his drawing. Like I forget his exact wording, but it was something like right around that time you were saying it was taking him 2-3 months to draw something. He got paralyzed by his own drawing. He couldn't finish a page that satisfied him. And it took him years to finally let that go and be able to put less detail on the page and have it work. He said he'd be working in detail on the page that no one would ever see.
Right.
And that just paralyzed him.
Sure. But the thing is, Hitch grew to a level of sophistication that was always economic, while Gary Frank took him to a level of sophistication that left his storytelling stunted.
Well, Brian Hitch eventually grew to a level of sophistication where he couldn't stop himself from drawing on a page. He was completely paralyzed by his own. He couldn't finish pages because he couldn't stop drawing on them. I found that interesting. I'm going to have to go find that tweet. I don't know if I took a screen. Sometimes I take screenshots of these tweets that interest me, but I don't think I did on that one. New Miller seems to fit that realm with me. He gave it more energy and less sophistication to get it done in 2002 onward. More often than not, I like energy over well rendered. The right way is boring. It can be. I mean, Frank Miller, I think, had health problems, but
he became more economic, but it worked. And I think that even as far back as the first Sin City, you could tell Ronin is overproduced compared to Daredevil work.
Ronin. This came out a few weeks ago, but finally hit my comic shop. This is Frank Miller Presents Ashcan edition, and it's just a couple of this one. Philip Tan is doing the new Ronin, and it was okay. It was kind of the writing that Frank Miller is writing here. I want to give you a closer look at it.
Sure.
Was almost unreadable. It was like a parody of Frank Miller writing. Get rid of that. The Philip Tan artwork was nice. The Frank Miller layouts were good, but this writing was just all, stilted on purpose. It was all like 3 words in a balloon, continue to the next balloon, continue to the next one. This stilted sort of dialogue that's, supposed to invoke some sort of time, but the time it invokes to me is just like stilted. But I mean, the artwork was okay, and then we have in the back is the Dan DiDio and who does this? Art and designs by Daniela Beyruth, and I couldn't even make it through this one. I read a page or two and went, I don't care. So I don't know if I'm getting, and I don't know if I'll be getting any of these Frank Miller Presents comics because I don't know what this one is about. I didn't care. I couldn't get into it.
Here's the thing. Frank Miller, to my opinion, to my idea, he overproduced on Ronin. He had a lot of lines that did absolutely nothing. In Sin City, he is more economic and more sophisticated at the same time.
Yeah, well, Ronin was his first thing that wasn't superhero stuff. I mean, so that was his first indie thing. So I can understand that. I feel
that Ronin was, in order to get to Sin City, he had to do Ronin. I think there was a development of style there.
And Ronin was 10 years before, right?
Yeah, way before. And Ronin, I don't recall if Ronin was before or after Dark Knight Returns.
Before.
Or if it was before Dark Knight Returns.
Uh-huh.
So I think that Ronin's style was what he was developing to get to what he eventually gets to in Dark Knight. And then eventually into Sin City. I think that process was where he was learning, and we visually saw it. I think the same thing with John Romita Jr. when he went from when he
Ronan
was
was
on
Miller channeling Mobius. Yeah, a little bit of that in there.
that too. But it's like it reminds me of John Romita Jr. when he went through that weird stage in the late 80s
Yeah.
where he went from when he was an early Spider-Man,
He went from
and,
generic comic book artist
right.
to having
Then
a
he went
style.
to yes, and the development of that style was during that time that he was
Yeah.
back on Spider-Man. It was really wonky artwork, and then I think he finished it off either in Daredevil or X-Men, where he became the John Romita Jr. that is doing the work. He eventually evolved into that style, but we had to get the weirdness of it, and I think Ronin is part of that weirdness for Frank Miller.
Right.
So
Right.
in order to get Dark Knight, we needed Ronin. I
What's
personally
interesting.
enjoy Ronin. I could never get through it, but I always enjoyed looking at it. And I remember when I was a kid, I would draw from it because it was
Ah.
just something there that I enjoyed so much in the work that I'm guessing it's because I saw something being developed there.
What's interesting is Ronin is one of the reasons that The Dark Knight Returns was under-ordered. Most people don't know, unless you were there at the time, you don't know that Dark Knight's Return #1 was under-ordered by the comic shops. And one of the reasons was because Ronin landed with a thud. In terms of Frank Miller was Frank Miller was the hottest guy in comics after doing Daredevil. Then he went over to DC with a chance to do Ronin, and he did Ronin, but Ronin was just too weird for people. It was not the hit that they thought it was going to be. Not that it sold poorly, I don't think, but it nobody thought it was as good as Miller's Daredevil. Nobody.
Right.
Everybody who loved Miller's Daredevil thought Ronin was, it was okay. There was some good stuff in it. So then when Dark Knight Returns came around a couple years later, it was an expensive, what was it, $4 book, whatever it was, twice as expensive as the normal comic book. It was not returnable because it was a direct only book. So shops under ordered it, and then it was a huge hit, and everybody was scrambling it was one of those books that the week after it came out, it doubled in price. So, and I think Ronin was one of the reasons for it, because all of a sudden after Ronin, people didn't have the faith in Miller that they had before Ronin. So I think that's an interesting thing that's lost to history. Did Byrne switch over to a writer who draws instead of a drawer? He writes. He could, like I said, he figured out how to draw economically. Not bad, just that was his main. He wasn't. I don't think he was thinking about how to draw better. He was thinking about how to draw economically, which makes sense because it's commercial art.
Byrne was proud of at the time was proud of the fact that he could write three comics and draw 2 in 1 month.
Yeah. Byrne was elegant, tall, and thin figures, almost a fashion silhouette kind of drawing, a bit after Ditko for me. Yeah, I loved John Byrne doing the X-Men and the FF and all that stuff, but eventually I grew bored with him. I mean, that's just... Hitch is doing Venom now and Hawkman recently. Oh, okay. Graphomania. That's where you can't stop drawing. That's when we were talking about Brian Hitch. Ronan, yeah. To be honest, I read later Ronin issues in the shop and didn't buy them. Yeah, I actually reread it a couple of years ago and enjoyed it. It's not my favorite thing, but it's okay.
I go back to it every few years to revisit it. Dark Knight Returns, I clearly remember picking up the first issue, flipping through it, and going, I don't get it, and putting it right back onto the shelf. I didn't read it until issue 3, because that was the only one I was able to find. because
Ah.
everyone was just so raving about it. And I did not read Ronin until after Dark Knight Returns.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh, this is pretty good. Oh, he did this too. Let me get it. It's like, this is completely different. And I think because visually seeing that after Dark Knight Returns, it was like, it was just a weird experimental thing he was doing with art. So I think that's why I was attracted to that. I don't know if it would have been that way if I read that first and then Dark Knight Returns,
Right.
but I'm not too sure. And then after Dark Knight Returns, Sin City, I read a couple of issues, but it didn't hold me. Same thing with 300, is that it got to a certain point where it's like,
I would
I don't want to say weird, but it was just so different that I'm not too sure what was going on. And some of the coloring wasn't that great with that art style.
I would have to say you have to 300 for me until I read it in the hardcover collected edition, which was twice as wide as a normal comic. I didn't get it. In terms of, I bought some of the issues of 300 and they were okay. Every page was a double page spread, blah, blah, blah. But in the hardcover edition, like I said, it's twice of what wide. So every double page spread is its own page. When I read it like that, I was like, wow, I get it now. This makes sense because it's double wide and it just read so much better in that form. Which makes me want to get what book is that? Echo Lands? Is that Echo Lands? Or is that the one by the one by J.H. Williams, which goes sideways and every page is a double page spread. But I think in the collected edition, it's twice as wide, so every double page spread is on its own page. So I want to read it that way. Just like I said, 300, it was like a different book when I read it in that format. And I was like, oh, this is how he wants us to see it. So it really does matter, what format you see it in. So, which amazes me sometimes because it's like I don't always believe that in my head, but sometimes when I'm convinced of it, I'm like, wow. I really liked this, and I didn't when I read it in the comic form.
Yeah, something to be said about formats and the way things
Yeah,
are put together.
yeah.
I do recall Mike Aldred had a series of books that he did it, I think 12 by 12, because it was basically a
The
record
Rocket
out.
Red ones, right?
Yes. And I found that to be interesting just because, one, I like his art style,
Yeah,
but
me
two,
too.
it's like it was interesting to see it in another format. Now, part of me is like I dislike it as a collector because there's no bag and board for that
Right,
type
right.
of format, and how do you put it away, type of thing. But there's something to be said for the experiment of something in that kind of format.
Yeah. I like stuff like that, but most fans don't. They don't respond to it as well. Byrne had a very clean, modern style, in my opinion, like a simple Jim Lee. But I agree, he wasn't stylistic. It got boring, and I think he got lazy. Backgrounds were just solid colors, no detail. That was gone by then. But like I think he took pride in it being a 9-to-5 job, and him being able to work from 9 to 5 and not put in the crazy hours that other comic book artists had to. Listen, I understand it. I don't fault him for it. It's just the work ended up being not as interesting to me. I put back Nexus back issues today to buy a few martial law, so my tastes are all shagged up anyway in terms of things drawn well. Martial law is fun. I always enjoyed that one. Kevin O'Neill with his weird drawing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes
but I
you
was
can
trying to.
be
I was,
all
I
over the
was
place.
I was trying to think of any other artist I would consider unsophisticated who was really popular, and I really couldn't besides Rob Liefeld. Usually unsophisticated, and it's funny because sometimes things can look unsophisticated, but they're not. It's like that's the artist's chosen style. They try to make it look unsophisticated. That's a sophisticated thing. So it's kind of like that's a whole different ball game.
Peanuts.
Peanuts. There you go. She tried to make it look unsophisticated, which, that's not easy to do. That's sophisticated.
Mm.
But Rob's the only one I can think of who I'd consider his work, especially early, unsophisticated, but people embraced it.
People embrace it. I remember having a conversation with one of the X-Men editors, and this is at some point where Rob came back and he was doing a cover, and I had asked him, well, why are you getting them to do a cover? No one likes him, and basically he's like, yeah, no one working likes him, but the kids are liking him and people are
Yeah.
buying it, so it's a business decision,
Right.
and it's
He
like
sells, they're going to hire him.
exactly. And it was like one of those things where I did not realize it's like, yeah, we can nitpick and take apart his artwork, but again, it's one of those things where as long as people keep buying it,
they're going to sell it.
they're going to sell,
And think of all those Rob Liefeld imitators in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
None of them got popular. Not a one. I can't even think of one's name who stuck around as a Rob Liefeld imitator and got popular. It just didn't have people who imitated Rob Liefeld were not as embraced as him. So
not at
that's
all.
what makes him even more of an outlier.
And I know that there were some artists who changed their art style to mimic him just so they can get work. And I understood that too. But eventually, it's one of those things is that, again, I mentioned before, luck is definitely one of those things that
happenstance, chance,
right place at the right time. And again, he still kept going with it. So everyone that's still around kept going and still getting the work, kind of a thing. Like he could easily had decided to take all that money and run, like a lot of people did during that Image craze, where Image were hiring a bunch of artists. They would have one book come out, and then they would just disappear after that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another thing about to come back and continue to do work. It's one of those things. Like most of the artists that kept getting work were the artists that kept showing up, who would come back and pick up work.
Think about what we were just talking about, Brian Hitch and Gary Frank. Think about all of the Alan Davis imitators.
Yeah, there was a lot of them.
And they're still out. They got popular being Alan Davis imitators, and they kept working. And still, Gary Frank still works today. But nobody got popular imitating Rob Liefeld. That's what makes him even more of an outlier. That if you tried to imitate his unsophisticated style, you didn't get as popular from him with it. People, imitated other styles and got popular, but for some reason, not. Like I said, I find even though I'm not a fan of his art, I find him such an interesting outlier. His art that it's tough to explain.
Yep, I cannot explain it myself. I've watched it for years, found it interesting. Worked, as I mentioned, worked in the comic book shop, saw how, everybody at Image was gaining this popularity, and I don't think it would have been the same if there weren't like publications like Wizard Magazine who were really pushing these guys' fame. At that time, all the magazines were pushing the fame, and then we had comic book magazines. We had so many of them at that time period. This is before the internet, so all the information you were getting were from the magazine, or they were early internet.
Yeah.
And again, working in the publicity department, there was always a fight to try to get onto the cover. I remember there was even a fan wrote into Wizard, and one of the quotes, and I only remember it clearly because they said, if you put all the Wizard magazine covers together, do you get one big image? And it was because they were just giving the Image guys all the press. Yeah. So there's that thing of them becoming, superstars. And what I read not too long ago was an article that talked about we do not have superstar artists, because they don't want to create another Image. Right. That kind of a thing where, Marvel was the one that took the big bite when Image left. They were the ones that were left standing there.
Marvel, I forget who it was. I can't remember. They specifically said, we're never going to promote artists again. I can't remember if it was Tom DeFalco or who. It was somebody. It was the editor-in-chief of the pub. So there was actually a meeting, and they said we're we're never making artists into stars again, and they haven't. That
Yeah.
became part of the corporate culture, which is why artists aren't stars anymore. But
The artists don't even have full
I
runs of books for a long time.
I don't
They're
think
only
that
there
was a
for a
very
few
good
issues and
plan.
then go. No, not at all.
But
It used to be a time where you can see, where an artist will have a run, a true run on books. Now you have only a few issues here and there, and then I don't know if maybe they have a meter. It's like this artist is getting too popular in this one title, move them on to something else. Who knows?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the. I think in part that's because it takes longer to draw these days in current styles. But I think it's also because I think artists are less thought about in terms of when you're putting a book together. I don't think the editors think as hard about artists as they once did.
I don't think so. I think that we're still feeling, and personally, I think we're still feeling the effects of the various presidents that the company has gone
Right.
through. And, during the time that I was there, group of editors were being hired for the fact that they didn't have any comic book background.
Oh, that was in the early 2000s.
Right. And
That's when
I think those effects are still,
Gemis saw it as a strength.
yes. And I
I
think that starts then, and we still feel the ripples of that.
as the old guy in the bullpen in the early 2000s, I used to have these young editors come to me, scared out of their minds, and ask me like what inking was, because they had to hire an inker and had no idea what inking was. So it was like I had to teach quite a few of them about comics.
So, so during that reign,
Yeah.
I think things were set up then that we're still
Right.
feeling the ramifications from. Because I'm hearing stories from artists and stuff like that, how quickly they were trying to figure out a way to cut costs, cut out inkers,
Oh yeah.
do things where it's like, you know, I was already out of Marvel by the time I started looking at stuff with a different eye and looking at things like, oh, here's a month that we are doing a lot more black and white books. It's like, why are the cover prices the same? Because I know how much money it costs to print a black and white book compared to a colored book, and they didn't change the price. So this is a new special month that they're doing black and white stuff. You know, that month of Nuff said. So that means no letterers were hired that month. So are they really doing something artsy, or they're just trying to save a buck for that particular month? And I think they were experimenting with going straight to color without even having an inker.
Right.
And then there was a weird time of them trying to figure out a way to, and they eventually did it, where everyone's doing the production at home.
But the
You're not.
letterers had to do the production.
Exactly. So, and I talked to artists today, and it's like they're not only being hired to pencil, but in some cases they got to ink, they got to put the files together, they got to make sure the files are put together correctly for them. So they're now becoming the bullpen themselves,
Right.
doing a lot more work and not getting paid any extra, because
Right.
now it's expected of them to have a computer, to have internet access, and to be basically answer the email 24 hours.
Right.
Because I've heard of artists getting emails at like 3 in the morning. It's like, why are you even up? Let alone contacting me at that particular time. So there's the not weirdness. There's this whole greed of how much money has the company saved by not using FedEx daily, because
Right.
everything's being sent in electronically. But there hasn't been a page rate raise in how
Yeah.
many years. I don't do coloring anymore because I was overpriced by a certain time, and I
Right.
got 3 pay cuts through my
Right. And you were
15
still
year
overpriced.
career. And exactly, so I had to stop coloring because what I was making when I first entered the industry, is almost top tier now, and it's like, really, because that was bottom tier when I started.
Yeah.
So every now I used to I don't have it anymore, but I used to have I have sticky notes all over my desk that you can't see. But I used to have a list stating what was Marvel's starting rate, DC start everyone's starting rate, just to have an idea of what to gauge when someone calls up and says, "Hey, can you do this kind of work?" Okay, what are you paying? And I could figure out where I would price it. And it got to the point where it's like I'm working for some small press companies and making a higher rate than Marvel or DC would be paying.
Hmm.
And it's like it's almost to the point where it's like I couldn't get work because I was either too efficient or my page rate was too high. And it's like, but you're also getting that experience. And then when I looked at the books afterwards, I got really upset because of how muddy the books looked, because they were hiring people. And it's fine. It doesn't matter how you get the job. You got
Right.
if you have your artwork on the internet, you have a digital portfolio, you're being hired to do that. That's fine. You got in that way, that's great. But they were hiring people who were coloring for digital. They were
Yeah.
coloring
Yeah.
for a screen. They were coloring for RGB, not for print. And then
Right.
when you start to see a whole bunch of books that look muddy because on the screen it looked beautiful, but they didn't account for the backlit.
That still
And
happens.
and it's still happening to this day, where you can look at a page and go, "Oh, this wasn't even inked. This was digitally darkened."
Right.
And you can see through it, where there was a bunch of Marvel books that you could still see the outlines of everything still there. That the comic book page, the blue lines were still there. They were a different color, but the blue
Yeah.
lines were there. You saw where it was just about the registration point was practically still there. So it's one of those things where the whole concept of, oh, let's bring in people who don't know comics,
Yeah.
is still, like I mentioned, it's still feeling the
Well, there's
effects
also
20
not
years
like
later.
Mark Grunwald used to. Every new hire, Mark Grunwald editorially, he used to he used to run a class and tell them how to edit, teach them all how to edit comics. That stopped when he died.
Right.
So that left in '96 even. But I think another reason that I think editors think less about artists these days is I don't think there's. What do you think editorial royalties are these days?
I
Not
don't know if
much.
I don't know if they're still there.
I don't,
I
in
don't
the
know if they ended it okay, so
during the
I
boom years,
during the boom years, you
an
can
editor could make an extra 2 or 3 grand a month on royalties. So you were always thinking about artists. That's all you were thinking about. You were
right.
thinking about the best artist you could get on a book to sell the most copies because you want that 2 or 3 grand.
hmm So I don't know if that ended when Bob Harris left,
I don't know either, but I
because he
assume
he was the X-Men editor
right,
who had the best artists on the books were the X-Men.
right.
So once
Everyone
he
wanted to
left,
draw the X-Men because they got the most money.
they got the most money. Even down to at that point in time, the penciler and the inker got residuals.
Hmm.
So sometimes those will be even more than the original page rate they got.
Right.
They got a percentage.
But I wonder if an editor today would think more about what artists to pick. If they picked the right one, they got an extra 2 grand a month.
Right.
I
But I,
think
I
that
but
I
I,
would
I
think that would make them think about the art a lot more.
but I'm guessing as every time an editor who had that deal left,
Yeah, they
and
didn't.
the next person didn't know about it, it
Right,
was even available. Colorists didn't get residuals until just about way after I left,
right.
and
Probably because they
uh,
did away with inkers. So
yeah, probably. But and again, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, I mean, I would be happy to just get a copy of my own books
yeah,
at this point, because every now and then I'll open up previews and then it's like, yeah, it's kind of weird to see my books listed under Marvel Classics. That aged me real quick. But it's like I would have liked a copy of the Wolverines that I worked on, a copy of Thor, because I'm not getting residuals on those. And the residuals, for the people who don't know, is different than royalties.
Right.
Because we were told they're not royalties. That was a whole big deal too back then,
Yeah.
of even wording things correctly of how to say it.
Right.
And
Right.
if a book sold a certain amount, you would get paid, and in the reprints, you would get paid again with those. And the colorist, because I didn't have it, all the books that they keep reprinting, and they do keep reprinting of my books. Again, it's like, oh, at least give me a copy, just so I can have it on my shelf.
A royalty is something they owe you. A
Right.
residual is something they give you.
Hmm.
Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird hit it big with the Ninja Turtles, and I grew up on their stuff, but I never thought their art was good or skilled much. I got to agree with you there. I don't think they were the best artists around, but they were decent indie artists. Now I think there's a bit of I think Kevin Eastman or Peter, one of them has been drawing Marvel covers, and they look so nostalgic. Doesn't take a lot for underground black and white. Yeah, a lot of underground. It's a different aesthetic too.
Yeah, I think the underground stuff is completely different. The Ninja Turtles phenomenon itself is another one of those hits. They were lucky enough to have enough money to borrow money from one of their uncles to just have a small print run that just happened to hit at the right time.
Yeah, who knows why? It was a parody of all the popular comics at the time.
Yeah, basically a parody of Frank Miller's Daredevil, basically.
Parody of the X-Men. They were teenagers.
Yep. So it
Miller's
it touched into what was going on at that time period.
Right. While the late 60s and 70s were about young adults revolt, the late 80s and 90s were teenagers revolt, grunge, radical sports, etc. Liefeld style fits perfectly there. Well, it was Peter Bagge who was the official cartoonist of grunge, so as they kept calling him. But yeah, I know what you mean.
And there was a lot of stuff that was manufactured. I mean, a lot of things that they created for rebellious youths was the product of marketing, and it was pushed by guys who were in their late 20s and early 30s.
Speaking of art, I thought this was the last issue of Shaolin Cowboy, Cruel to Be Kin, but there's one more. I thought it was a 5-issue mini. Guess it's a 6-issue mini because there's another issue. But as a lot of the first 3 issues was a Shaolin Cowboy fighting in the desert. The next 3 issues, with one more to go, is the Shaolin Cowboy fighting in a city. And it's all about the art. The art is just spectacular. He just has these incredibly crowded fight scenes with all this one. We have an incredibly crowded fight scene with gun fu going on as he fights all these guys in a crowded room. And it's just last issue. I'm going to do it with this issue too. My second time through, I'm going to take a magnifying glass to this art because there's so much to see in it. It's crazy. It's fun to just look at all the crazy things that are going on in this art.
That artist definitely needs to have a bigger sized book.
It's a storytelling style that doesn't exist anywhere else except Jeff Darrow.
Correct. Because
the story is almost meaningless. But the graphomania in the art gives it some meaning because you just want to look at it. And this one is full of crazy, all sorts of crazy signs about the NRA and Trump. That's just like and Where's Waldo books. There we go. That's what it's kind of like just all the background stuff. There's there's like pin-up girls in the background and stuff, and where's some of the USD select, and he is, and all these guys are racist because there's random swastikas around them. There's here in the background is a poster that says NRA with a naked woman on it, and it's just like crazy. There's stars and bars. The and the back here, we've got a National Front flag. So it's like all these guys are Nazi racists that he's killing too. So it's just nuts, all the stuff that's in here. This guy's got a tattoo of a rat on his arm for no reason. So I look forward to going through this with a magnifying glass next.
And that's by Dark Horse, who just made the news recently as well this week, that they're now going to be distributed by Random House.
Oh, they are? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Random House has a distribution network for comics, and a lot of companies have been leaving Diamond and going over to Random House.
Wow. Interesting. Well, who's already with Random House?
That I don't know exactly. I think Marvel is with them.
Are they with Random House? I can't remember what publisher they're with. Maybe it is.
I think it is Random House.
Okay, so there are more people going around. Let's hope they do a good job.
Yeah, they know it is, and they go with Marvel just so you can show up in the same catalog.
Good idea. that reminds me of back when I was in college. My friend Ed worked at Apple Comics, if you remember them, in the mid '80s. I think they published Vietnam Journal. They published ElfQuest for a brief time because the guy who ran Apple Comics was friends with the Peonies. And they were publishing this comic called Mr. Fix-It by Howard Bender. And it was sort of this Silver Age homage comic. It was actually pretty good. But, how many people in 1986 were looking for a Silver Age homage comic? Everybody was looking for the next Turtles. Mm-hmm. But anyway, at the time, it was the Gray Hulk was one of Marvel's hits, who was called Mr. Fix-It. That was his, name in Vegas. So they're putting out this Silver Age homage character, Mr. Fix-It, with his all-purpose screwdriver gun. And like, because Ed was doing some of their stuff for them, some of their production and things. One of their ad things that they sent out to comic shops was a flyer saying, ideas of how to sell Mr. Fix-It. And one of them was, rack it next to the Hulk. People might think it's a tie-in.
That's perfect.
There's a marketing campaign for
you. Just put them next to the Marvels.
People might think it's a tie-in. That cracked me up. I still laugh at it all these years later.
So Random House not only puts out their own set of mangas, Attack on Titan, stuff like that, because I've done work with them, but they're also putting out Marvel books, and there are Batman books on the website, so DC stuff as well. But I don't see like an official list of who else is publishing through them. But again, it's one of those things where there's now another large distribution network.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the main problems with comics. On top of everything else it has always been a distribution type of promise. To me, it just seems like people either don't know comics still around, or where to get them.
Right.
Has been the problems that I would run into every time I would see like somebody new at a convention. It was like, oh, I didn't even know they still did conventions. I didn't even know. So there's this advertisement that's not happening.
Well, I also think that is still an effect of the comics code and the infantilization of U.S. comics. They never developed a distribution system, a mass market distribution system. As soon as they became just for kids, like in Japan, part of the success of the comics is their distribution system. supposedly you can buy comics out of a vending machine on the subway. Because their distribution system grew as comics grew. In the U.S., comics grew to a point were infantilized, and then the distribution system didn't grow along with it. There was a time they were trying to get, comics into, sort of graphic novels like It Rhymes with Lust in the late 40s into newsstands, but there was no place for it. And no place for it ever developed through newsstands or whatever, because they were kids' things. They were secondary. They were as the magazine grew, comics shrank.
The obvious thing that nobody actually thought about doing was doing comics in the same size as paperback novels.
There were some, but they were just shrunken comics. Yeah.
Like that would have been the best place to put them.
There were, I have pocket books like that where they shrunk down all the Spider-Mans to paperback novels. So once again, that was for kids, and I bought it when I was a kid. Before trade paperbacks, I had those little tiny,
the little pocket books and again, for us as kids, we loved them.
Yeah.
But as you grow up and you look at them, it's like, wow. So they didn't make the book for they didn't make the book, they didn't make the artwork for that format. They just shrunk it and just like left it there. And
I had no problem, as a kid with those being small, because I had young kid excellent vision.
Yeah.
But I imagine no adult's going to want to read those shrunken down ones.
It's just too small, I remember there was the novelty little comic books that came 25 cents.
Oh, those ones. I never saw any of those. They were always mythological to me.
I've seen them when I was a kid, and they would break apart easily, but I never kept one.
They weren't bound.
No, not at all.
I just got this in the mail today. Carla Speed McNeil, one of my absolute favorites. This came out a couple of years ago. It was in Dark Horse Presents, and they collected it all in here. I finally decided to pull the trigger on it and get it this week. But I don't need, this is a 6x9 manga size. Even this is too small for me. I'd rather it be full comic size. But it's not. So I finally pulled the trigger on it. But if you've never read Carla Speed McNeil and her Finder series, it's just terrific. And it's really hard to describe. They have a few blurbs on the back here that crack me up, because it's really hard to describe. Rolling Stone says, fabulous adventure fiction for those who find Game of Thrones a little too straightforward. And Publishers Weekly says, McNeil's solid mix of mythology, cyberpunk, and incisive personality give her world building an edge, which I think is a good description. But mix of mythology, cyberpunk, and incisive personality. What is that? How do you? Well, this is so hard to describe. The Comics Journal describes it as simultaneously straightforward and labyrinthine, genre-based and uncategorizable. It's solid sci-fi of the kind they were making in the 1970s. Ursula Le Guin, Vonda McIntyre type stuff that's all about anthropology and world building and a little bit of the old feminism. And it's just like, man, it's just, I love this stuff. It's hard to describe, though. She is the only one that if you were to ask me who she's like, I would say Jack Kirby. And she's the only one I compare to Jack Kirby. And I don't compare her to Jack Kirby because her art and writing are anything like Jack Kirby. I compare her to Jack Kirby because in the 70s, Jack Kirby wasn't just writing stories. He was creating whole cultures to go along with his stories. If you read Jack Kirby stories from the 70s, there's different culture. And I think this is what leaves people cold to a lot of Jack Kirby's 70s story, is there's a little bit of a culture shock to him, and they have a little bit of time relating because lots of his characters come with a whole new culture attached to them. And that's kind of what she's doing here. Whole cultures come with her stories. They call it world building here, but to me it's more than world building in that, like in this one, in the Finder world, there's all different clans who have all different customs and cultures. And sometimes the stories are about what those cultures interacting and what goes on. And like this one is all about she was one of the younger girls in an earlier story who's now reaching adulthood and moving to the big city. And she's half one, I forget, Levelac. She's half of this one type of ethnicity and half of this other type ethnicity. So she's from two cultures, but she looks more like this one particular culture. So she's trying to embrace that culture, and she goes to the city to kind of be in that culture as a grown-up and find her way. So it's all about her learning about her own culture and how it's different in the big city than where she was, even though she was in a big city. So, and there's so much going on about the culture that it's just like wild. And it's so crazy because it's like they have all these customs and stuff, and it's just, it's wonderful. I absolutely love her stuff. If you ever get a chance to read Finder, go ahead and read it because her storytelling is like no one else's. And there's two big, thick library Finder volumes from Dark Horse and a couple of smaller ones. Plus, she self-published a lot of stuff. I have all her self-published trades. Finder is great. It sure is. Duotone to chemical stuff that was used on a lot of the underground stuff in the 80s was used much at all in the big two. I can never tell because of the coloring. I think the Turtles made duotone more popular, but John Byrne used duotone a lot, especially in his Submariner books. But most people, because when you use duotone at Marvel, you had a lot of times you had to buy your own paper and chemicals. Sometimes Marvel would supply it, but not always. Sometimes you can ask for it and they'd get it for you. Sometimes they wouldn't be able to get it for you in time, so you had to get it yourself. Or you had to know to ask for it. So Byrne knew to ask for it and used a lot of duotone in the 90s. But like I think it was the Turtles who made duotone and zippotones popular. In those they made a lot of people put gray shades in all their black and white books, at least try to, in order to imitate. Yeah, the big two did supply it, but you had to ask. It wasn't always. Sometimes it was tricky to get from the big two. You had to know to ask for it, and they had to give it to you. So sometimes that was an extra step that people didn't want to bother with. Good evening, Tats Comics. Went to Goodwill Book and went through 18 long boxes and found some books for 99 cents. Wow. Wow. That's a lot of long boxes to go through.
That is. There was a time that I loved doing that. Just sit there and just go through them to pick out books. Now, if I go and there's a rack of books and they're not in alphabetical order, I don't even want to try.
I was never that much of a back issue hound because I've had a pull list since I was 10. You know, even though at the local Stout Steve's or 7-Eleven, I didn't technically have a pull list, but I knew all the books came out on Thursday afternoons, and I was there every Thursday afternoon pulling the comics I wanted, since from 10 until now. And as soon as a comic shop opened when I was 15, when I was 16, and my friend could drive, I've had a pull list since I was 16, literally, and a figurative one before then. So it's like buying back issues was never a big draw for me because there's always so much new stuff to buy. And now, of course, I buy all my back issues in collected editions. I got tons and tons of collected editions. So I never went through long boxes a lot. Your hands must be full of crazy dirt at the end of that dig. Yeah. Paulo doesn't even have back issue bins to dig through.
No. That's why we keep asking the publishers to reprint stuff, and maybe they'll get around to it in 17 years or so.
And here's another one I got this week. Haven't read it yet. The Electric Sublime by W. Maxwell Prince and Martin Marazzo, the Ice Cream Man guys. And this is from before Ice Cream Man. The Electric Sublime. And what it was they just announced in one of the comic shop news that they're reprinting this, but they said they were remastering it somehow. And it's coming out like later in the winter or the fall. And I think they're releasing it as individual issues first. They're renaming it the Art Brute, which is what they wanted to name it in the first place. And I was sitting there going, oh, that sounds cool. But do I really want to buy individual issues of something that's already been printed and collected? Mm-hmm. And I started doing the math going, well, if it's $4 an issue for $5, I'm like, how many pages? Then I was like, let me just look on eBay to see if it's already been collected. And sure enough, the first one was already collected, and it was $8 shipped. So I'm like, you know what? I'll read it for $8 shipped, and if I really like it, I'll check out the new remastered edition. If not, I can leave it alone.
One thing I don't get is whether these times with remastered editions, recolored editions, when it's quite obvious what they should be doing, they should be putting out their trades as manga sized.
See, I'm just never gonna buy any of them. I mean, I don't blame them for putting out the stuff manga size, but
they should. You know, they really affordable format that's popular right now. Format does matter if it means that you have to that it's put in a place where you can reach new customers. Right. It's my previous comment about in the 50s they should have made the comics the same size as paperback novels.
Right. But Marvel Masterworks, they've been coming out with them manga size. I don't know if you know that. All the Marvel Masterworks stuff they've been reprinting at 6x9.
Mm. It's gotta be smaller even than even 6x9.
6x9 is what manga size is over here, I think.
Is Marvel printing that out, or is they have
Marvel
company doing it? Okay.
And Marvel is also, I was just reading in the latest comic shop news or last week's, they're putting out remaster works where they're reprinting their earliest masterworks that have been out of print for so long with new digital files that they've upgraded since then, and some new material. Like the Amazing Spider-Man one is going to have the original art from Amazing Fantasy 15 that's now available. Wasn't available when they first did it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So they're putting out remaster. So if you weren't able to get any of those early Marvel Masterworks, you'll be able to get new versions of them with new stuff. And I also read that we've talked before about how Eric Larson didn't want to put out Savage Dragon Masterworks like stuff, but he is now. So he's got the first volume coming out, and he said it's up to 70 pages of sketch material in the back.
Wow.
I was like, oh, that's cool.
That's pretty neat. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that might, I really don't want them, but I might get the first one. I think they're also around $40 rather than the $60 the Marvel ones are. We'll have to see.
So you're saying that they didn't have Amazing Fantasy?
No, they didn't have the original artwork.
Okay.
The original, I think sometime in the original artwork was stolen back in the 80s, I think it was. Along with a lot of other artwork that was stolen. It showed up in Texas in the 90s, I think it was. And there was some dispute over ownership of it, but the owner of it, the anonymous owner of it, donated it to the Smithsonian.
Okay, yeah. I know that it ended up there. I just didn't know that Marvel itself did not have copies
No,
of
not
it at
of.
all.
Well, no, they had the stats,
Right.
but they didn't have high resolution scans of the actual original artwork. Artist edition style.
Oh,
because
okay.
because that didn't exist then. They
Right.
had, they still had the black plate, but they're going to print the actual original artist edition style in the back. He washed his hands. All right. It'll be a sweet book to pick up from Eric Larson. Yeah. But who's going to be around for volume 6?
Don't
I'll
put
wait
any.
for rebooted reprint faux reissue essentials. Yeah. Hold on. Got another facsimile edition this week. Where is it?
Now that French album series did not used to have numbers. They have them now, but they didn't used to.
Yeah.
Especially for Asterix, because nobody is going to read Asterix in order. You would pick up an Asterix book.
Comics, yeah. Action Comics #1. Facsimile edition. How much was it? $7. I just like these facsimiles, but I first time I've read the whole thing, and I don't think I've read the Superman story since the 80s. I didn't even remember it. I mean, it's got none of the Superman stuff we know in it. His origin is done in.
Well, it's done in comic strip style because it's just a cut up comic.
His origin is done in a page. There's no Mon Pa Kent. He was an He was raised in an orphanage.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It says what does it say? His nothing that's. Kent had come from a planet whose inhabitants' physical structure was millions of years advanced of our own. So that's where he got his superpowers from. His physical structure was millions. So there was no red sun. There was no. He had super strength because he was a million years ahead of us.
And I think there was something about the gravity being stronger on his planet.
No, not even.
No?
That wasn't
Okay,
even
so
here
that
yet.
was later on too.
Yeah.
Wow.
It says when maturity was reached, he discovered he could easily leap an eighth of a mile, hurdle a 20-story building. So he couldn't fly in the first one, but I knew
Right.
that. Raise tremendous weights, run faster than an express train, and nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin.
It looks like a carnival barker. He's telling us all that.
Yeah. And then his whole his whole he's more like Batman in this first issue. He's just kind of fighting crooks, and he's fighting corruption in the police force, kind of thing.
Yeah, that was normal for superheroes back in the 40s. I mean, there were not that many supervillains.
No, the concept of supervillains didn't come till I think a little later.
Yeah, I mean, they sometimes would fight some characters that looked funny. Usually they wore a robe or something.
He's climbing the sign of the building.
But nobody else had a costume or superpowers. The villains were not superpowered.
What's
there was an occasional mad scientist, but no powers. Who's just angry scientist.
What surprised me is I must have forgotten the first Superman story is to be continued. It's not even self-contained.
No, but that would not be out of the ordinary for National Comics at the time.
Yeah,
they had ongoing strips, and they were because they were formatted as newspaper strips. They were ongoing, and in many cases, they would reach a natural end for the storyline.
There's at least 2 or 3 to be continued stories in here.
Does that book also contain any 2-page just story, no art?
There's a couple of text. There's always art, but they're text pages.
Okay.
So they can get their mailing discount.
I always found those fascinating, that to have here's the comics, here's some art, and then all of a sudden here's some text.
Well, you know why they were in there? So they could. You had to have 2 pages of text to get the third class mailing prices. Otherwise, you had to mail them first class, and that cost a lot more money. That's why comics had pages of text in them.
Okay, that
And
I didn't.
yeah,
That I was aware it had to do with something about the mail, but I
yeah,
didn't know exactly what it was.
that's what it was. You could mail them cheaper. But yeah, and almost all of these are, just a couple black and white stories, comic strip storytelling based. Like I said, you can see why all these guys were watching Jack Kirby and what's his name? All of a sudden I can't remember. Mort Meskin, who were 2 of the guys who started doing things differently. So everybody was looking at them. But good stories, too. I was surprised how much I enjoyed reading about maybe 2/3 of these stories were really well done. The Zaytara, what's his name?
Zatara.
The Zaytara story was pretty good. There was a Marco Polo story that was pretty good. So it's better than and more sophisticated than I thought it was.
The Marco Polo story was one of the ones with to be continued, correct?
Yes, that was a to be continued one.
Because these national comics at the time, they had several strips of that kind. They were kind of either historical or they were made to resemble either a pulp or some sort of travel log documentary, and they would eventually finish, but they would always be to be continued, and even if they were 4 to 6 pages per issue, because the first year and a half of National Comics, New Fun Comics and stuff like that, the strips were 1 page because they were made to resemble Sunday pages,
right?
And they would all be to be continued. The at least the adventure ones were the humor ones. They would get to they would get to a punchline at the end.
Yeah,
But yeah, resembles, and because those comics were, because Donenfeld was involved in that,
right?
Donenfeld was connected, as well as Max Gaines, to the newspaper industry.
Yep. So that's how they knew to do things.
Mm-hmm.
Tit Goblin was going to buy the faux Superman, but couldn't pull the trigger on the price. Yeah, $7 is a little steep.
Yeah, at least they should make it a hardcover or something. But
then
then they would charge you $25 for it.
Yeah. I got 1 copy of the Superman book. It was the last at my LCS. Right. If Scott were here, he'd remind that Superman stole a lot from Doc Savage, the Fortress of Solitude, the name Clark, for starters. Yeah.
But most of it is not in that first story.
Right. Speaking of, the Superman book being too expensive, where's the one I got? Here's the first issue. I picked Vanish by Donnie Cates and Ryan Stegman. J.P. Meyer, Sonia Oback, John J. Hill, or that creators down. But this wasn't on my pull list. There were 3 comics I was looking at buying this, because I ended up with like 10 comics, so it was an expensive week for me. I think it was $38. But it turned out to be a solid comic. It's like kind of a little melodramatic and cheesy. It's about a guy from a magic world, and this was his origin story. All this magic happened, but then at the end, we find out they're now on our Earth, and some of the villains from the magic world are now on our Earth, and they're pretending to be superheroes. So now this guy is going to be the villain who takes them down because they destroyed his world. But it was fairly well done. But what made me get this one was, first of all, the physical comic. It's a nice cardstock cover, good heft to it, a lot of pages, plenty of pages all the way through, $4. The other 2 I was looking at were floppy, no good cardstock cover, and were $5 each. And I was just like, you know what? Paying $5 to try out a first issue to me is just like it's a losing proposition most of the time. So if it's not like a week when I don't have anything, the $5 books are just not going to win out over the $4 book. So it's like this one won out because it was a better physical product and a cheaper physical product. So that matters. So if you're looking for a solid superhero comic this week, Vanish is a pretty good one. Donnie Cates.
Is that part of that superhero universe? What was it called? No.
The Radiant Black. I got the new one of that. The Massive Verse. No, it's its own thing. Radiant Black. This issue was sort of a done-in-one, all about Radiant Yellow. So this one had an interesting storytelling technique. There are 4 years: 1984, 2002, 2020, and 2038. And their stories run. Here, let me get myself bigger again. Their stories run across the comic. So those black boxes have the years in them. And then there are 4 stories in 4 time periods that run across the comic. So first you read 84, 88, and 2020, 2040. So once I caught on to that and got used to it, I enjoyed it. So it's the same guy in 4 time periods telling the story about Radiant Red. And kind of the hook is Radiant Black takes place in our year 2020, whatever, 2022. But one of the 4th story takes place in 2028 down the bottom, where disaster happens. So at the end of like the 4th story, at the end of the story, he goes back in time to right now to try and change his past, now the future, as Radiant Yellow somehow. Or we don't know what went wrong, but something went wrong, and the Earth was a dystopia. So it was an interesting. I got to tell you, at first I was like, oh no, a gimmicky storytelling technique. Once I figured out what it was, I was like, oh. First I was like, what's going on? I was confused. Because of course I read the years, then went, oh, whatever. Then I was like, what's going on here? I can't, by like the 4th and 5th pages, I was like, oh, I get it. Oh, what a gimmicky storytelling technique. But then by the end, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. So they won me over with their storytelling.
It's an odd format because it kind of reminds me of
it is odd.
There used to be some comic strips. I don't know what the name of the format would be, but you would get them with the cereal boxes, and it would just be a long comic book, and you would just read it as you would a comic book. Right. But it's just 1 strip long. So it's basically, if you were to take that physical book and cut it in 4s, but keep it attached at the spine, those would be the comic books that you would get. They were usually, like I said, they would be cereal boxes. Was one of the ways you would get them. And I have them for Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, but I'm almost sure they would have been a superhero one made. That comic book reminds me of those strips just not being cut.
Right.
Because you could read that story, well, maybe not that particular story because they are connected to what's going on, but you could read it that way as well, which is just what triggered that memory. It was like, oh, I'm wondering if they were kind of going with that without actually physically cutting the books.
Right. And 62 Lefty Blues tell us the new previews has a radiant pink in it. Okay, I'll give that one a try. It was like the Power Rangers. There's different colors of radiance. And I think their story all leads to the disaster that was in the future in that one. Got to go to my son. Take my son to football. All right, have a good one.
Take care.
Football practice, always fun.
And it's funny because when you showed that Action Comic
Mhm.
cover, it triggered the memory of that. I have a copy of it that was released when they did the Superman tribute stamp. So
Mhm.
there was an issue of Action Comics reprinted with the stamp. So I have that, and I have it within the collection. But I kind of forget I have it because it's not with the core books. Because it's a I think I have it with like my promotional books and things like that, where
Right.
because it's that reprint type of thing. But it's a different type of reprint. So every now and then when I'm going through stuff, that copy will pop up, and you get triggered and thinking, do I have Action Comics #1? And I'm not even realizing it. It's like, no, this can't possibly be it. I go, oh, now I remember where this is from because I still have the stamp attached to it.
Hold
But
on.
it's
At
one of the
some
things,
time in my life, did I buy Action Comics #1 and forget?
and forget I even own it.
I'm a millionaire.
So when I saw you pulling that out, I was like, wait, does he have an original?
He's a
Did
millionaire.
he decided, guess what I found?
No, it's funny. I actually sold it a couple of years ago. Do you remember the Action Comics #1 reprint from 1988? Except I don't think it wasn't the whole book.
I think so. Was that that wasn't the oversized one, right?
No.
With the
It was
silver.
regular
Okay.
comic size. Well, it's fun. I actually sold mine a couple of years ago because it raised up in price for some reason. I sold it for like, I don't know what, $40 or $50. I was like, oh, that one's worth $40 or $50. Someone else can have it.
Right.
But the only reason I had it was, once again, I was in college. My friend Ed and I were heading over to the comic shop. I said to my friend John and whoever else was there, you want anything from the comic shop? And John's like, get me Action Comics #1. As a joke, he said that, right? Except I knew that week the reprint of Action Comics #1 was coming out. So I thought that's what he wanted. I didn't even get the joke.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew that reprint was coming out that week. So I got in there. I wouldn't even have got it myself. But I bought some comics and I got Action Comics #1 for John. And I'm like, and I got back there, I'm like, here you go, I got you your Action Comics #1. He was like, what are you talking about? Like, didn't you say you wanted Action Comics #1? He's like, that was a joke. I was joking. And I was like, oh, I get it now.
So you owe me $500,000.
So I kept the comic for myself. But I didn't even get the joke because I knew it was coming out.
That was the reprint. That was a 50 cents comic, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. It wasn't expensive.
Yeah, because I think I remember like it was promotional, and I think it had a corner box art of the. They were promoting that reading books and stuff like that was the big deal back then, and they were putting those boxes on them. I did get that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it turned out, like I sold it a couple of years ago because it turned out people wanted it because there was never an Action Comics #1 reprint like it or something like that. But now we've got the facsimile edition. I'm sure people want that instead. Tom King is deep into alinear storytelling. It sucks. He's a moron. I hope it can be done better, but it feels like a trend. It's a cancer of storytelling. It can be very gimmicky.
We can move on to my favorite to my favorite bashing, which is not Rob Liefeld bashing. It's Tom King bashing.
I read a little Tom King. I took out of the library years ago when I was going to the library before COVID regularly. His what was it, Mr. Miracle? And listen, my biggest problem with his Mr. Miracle was it would have been better if it wasn't a DC story. In terms of he was doing all these things with the characters that didn't really fit the characters and you knew would be wiped away. You know, I think he killed Darkseid in the story, but you knew he didn't really kill Darkseid, so there were no stakes. And you knew there were no stakes to the character development because the next writer would just write something new. So all the dramatic things that happened weren't that dramatic.
He thought he was being clever with that veggie platter thing. The veggie platter had a lot of talk around it on Twitter.
I don't even remember it.
I
Because
don't think I read any Tom King books.
Darkseid goes to Scott Friesenbarder's house on Earth,
Yeah.
and he wasn't being expected, so Scott goes to the kitchen and gets him a veggie platter.
Right.
That's supposed to be a joke. Darkseid eats a veggie platter.
Yeah. Like I said, there's not that
So,
was
so
if
it's
it
the
was
trope of boss coming over and it's a sitcom joke, basically. The boss is coming over to dinner, and then it's like, we got to make something.
Right.
Okay. All right.
That's what. If it
I don't
was
know
an
what to say.
indie comic with all new characters, I think I would have liked it better. Hold on, Saul likes that one. Mr. Miracle was great. Conquered like a human being back then. How low he? Yeah, I've heard because he was the darling for a little while with Vision. I think he became the darling.
Yeah,
but I've heard
first with Vision, then they did the. Actually, I didn't buy the. I read the Vision, but once, but it hardly registered. I mean, all of a sudden his robot daughter starts murdering people, and that's what and what.
I never read the Vision.
Then I read his Omega Man, and Omega Man is kind of good. The thing is,
Yeah, people liked that one. I remember.
Kyle Rayner was in it, but it doesn't do anything except cry. And then that gets put into perspective the more you read of Tom King's works, because that's what he does. He has a self-insert. You know when writers create self-inserts who are better and more powerful and stronger than everyone else, and everyone loves them. Tom King does self-inserts where he cries, and people walk all over him. It's like some sort of BDSM thing for him.
Tom King only works with top artists. That helps. Oh yeah.
I also don't get why people like Mr. Joe Reds, but whatever.
What did he do? He was the one who drew
Mr. Miracle.
Mr. Miracle, right? Okay.
I think Jerez had worked with the singer guy who did that Doom Patrol.
Okay. I thought the drawing was all right, but it didn't.
Yeah, I mean he's not bad, but I don't get why everybody loves him like that. I guess he has a style that nobody else has. But if you're trying to do a superheroes for a superhero publisher, it doesn't work.
I think he's got a clever storytelling style that you don't see in superhero work. So I think that's what people respond to too.
It's getting so shallow.
I'm not saying it's a deep style. I'm saying it's a style, which you don't get.
And repetitive.
One of the problems with superhero storytelling of the last, the digital age.
No, but he's not writing a superhero story. He's writing a story where people are dressed as superheroes, but it's some sort of.
Yes, but superhero people are buying it.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the David Aja and Matt Fraction Hawkeye, which superhero people loved. I wasn't as fond of it.
There's a superhero story in there.
Yeah.
What Tom King's doing is that he's using those stories as some sort of therapy session.
That is what I've been hearing recently from his fans now.
And that's why it's shallow. I mean,
yeah.
Yes, Tom King, please tell me about your problems. No, actually don't. If you're telling me about your problems, you should be paying me, not the other way around.
No fans of Human Target, then, I guess? Is Mitch Gerard drawing that one?
I'm not sure.
Tom
King is writing it.
I can't remember. I can't remember who's drawing it, but I just saw he did a long post on his thought process on Twitter of Human Target, which I saved, and I'm gonna have to go back and read. I never did, on his thought process with his color that I thought was pretty interesting. But Tom King is writing. Okay, who's drawing that one? Crack. I've heard people praise the art a lot, but no one has mentioned the writing of Human Target. I find that a little interesting. But like I said, once again, we're into some sophisticated artwork on that one because he's thinking deeply about it. He even gave a process post about his thinking on it. Greg Smallwood. There we go. Beautiful art and coloring. Yeah, like I said, he gave. Let me see if I can open it. Where did I think I saved it to this computer. I saw his name somewhere. I went, who's Greg? I saw a file with his name on it in my downloads, and I went, who's Greg Smallwood? I was like, oh. After I just saved it, I couldn't remember his name. Where is it? There we go. Greg Smallwood on Twitter PDF. Let me see if I can. I think I have to have this in the same thing as my thing. Okay, now I can share. Share screen. Oops, there we go. Here is. I saved it as a PDF. Where'd it go? This is his whole. This is him writing about his coloring process on it. He even gives you a color wheel. So this, it's about him pushing the contrast between stylization as realism. Some of the book design on it and other people responding to him. So he gave a nice thread here. I don't know what happened to the first part of it. It disappeared. But go to Greg Smallwood's Twitter if you want to read about him and his coloring process.
Yeah, even though I never read the book itself, I always did find it visually appealing.
Yeah, I've seen people on Twitter with it. I mean, people on YouTube showing the book off. I'm like, oh, that looks pretty cool, that artwork. But never motivated me to get it just because I get enough comics.
Yeah.
I don't have to get another one that I especially it's an expensive one, that one. Any Rip Reader slab tonight, Jared? Well, since you demanded it, let me see what I got here. I think I have a few still. Where are they? A few still I didn't make any new ones, but I have a few I still haven't shown. So let's see what ones we got. Dun, 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 dun. 1968 September. I don't know if I did this one or not. Let's see. (1968 September). Do you guys remember this one?
No, this is
not. I must not have done it.
I think we did something similar, but not with these.
Yeah,
books.
not this one. Something else with. Right here we got Just Married 61, Bunny number 6, and Tippy Teen number 21. I have to. Oh, that must be a leftover number I didn't delete. America's Swinginest Teens. Whoa. What's going on in that one? She's hip, she's mod, she's boss. Bunny. And Just Married for the adult action. Read Tippy, Slab Bunny, Rip Just. Rip Just, that's the adult one.
Read Bunny, Slab Just, Rip Tippy.
Rip tip. I no longer buy a book for the art. Story is fundamental. It is, because I buy a lot of stuff. I'm enjoying it. Story's pretty decent, but the art is what I'm there for. Sometimes she's hip, she's mod, she's boss. Got to read that one. Rip Just Married and Slib Tippy T. Nobody wants to read the adult-oriented Just Married. I don't know.
The weird thing for me is I want to read them all because of how weird because it's almost the same book in some weird alternate universe to each other, because they're all blonde girls, and it could be her story.
Rip Just Married.
It's just wow.
That's a kiss. Everyone's ripping it because it's a kissing book.
Also, which book would you dolphin?
Yeah. Oh, that's easy for me.
Just Married, because I want to see the guy kissing the dolphin.
That is the exact thing I was going to say.
I want to see the girl kissing the dolphin.
I want to see. I wasn't even going to replace the just like Wilson. I was going to replace the girl and have the guy kissing it.
No, better yet, I want to see two dolphins intently staring at them kissing.
Slab Bunny. There's a pipe smoker. Read Tippy, rip the kiss. Everyone's ripping the kiss. It's too icky. When you're a kid and get your first Charlton comic, it's totally disappointing. Oh, I know that.
That's
two dolphins looking at the kiss. Yes.
I don't know if you guys ever ran into having. I've been lucky in my life where I've had people just give me their collection.
Right.
25 books or whatever. It's like, oh, I have some comics. They're usually Archie's or the Harvey stuff and whatnot. And it would just be a weird, eclectic kind of a thing.
Oh, you like comics? Here's some comics.
Here's some, exactly. And it's like, and there will always be a Charleston book in there that just like, okay.
Charlton.
A Charlton. Sorry.
I was just about to say the amount of people who call it Charleston is amazing to me, and you just called it Charleston. Or occasionally people call it Charlton, Charlton too, and I'm like, no, it's Charlton.
Charlton. And it's like there will always be one in there, and it will always be an odd title. It wouldn't even be like, it would always be a pop culture thing of a show I never watched. You know, because they had the licenses on that. And again, I would want to read them all because of how weird that they're oddly the same book, but they're not.
I am slabbing Bunny. That one is just so weird, that cover.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to read Bunny. And I think I think so. I would slab Tippy Teen and rip the Just Married.
Damn it! I think I'm gonna rip Just Married too. There's no way around.
Yeah, that's.
Actually, Jared, you have to do a poster of this Bunny cover.
I think I'm gonna have to find it.
Especially because it's self-referential. It says this is pop art. In case you missed it.
Oh, I missed that. You're right. I did. I'm gonna have to track that one down now. Wow.
No, it's not. In case you missed it, in case anybody looked at this cover and missed that it was pop art, the photographer is saying that this is pop art.
Yeah.
So Tippy Teen, that Dan DeCarlo?
It looks like it.
I'm not sure. Tippy Teen was published by Tower Comics, I think, and yeah, it was Tower Comics, but it was reprints of old stuff, and they just changed the names, I think. Okay, so it's Sam Schwartz. Really?
Dan Schwartz?
Sam Schwartz.
Sam. Okay.
I don't even think I've heard of him before now.
I don't think I have either. And the Just Married cover, that art looks familiar, but I can't place who
that might be. Coletta.
You think so?
It vaguely looks like Coletta for me in this little thumbnail I'm looking at.
The GCD says it's a guy named Luis Avila.
Okay, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
And the bunny, it kind of looks like Mort Todd, but
but he was 5 years old at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Dan Goldberg? No.
Okay, so Sam Schwartz worked at Archie, which explains why you want to do an Archie clone, you get an Archie artist.
Yeah.
So, Bunny, the cover is by Hy Eisman.
Hy Eisman. I don't have to look for that one. Bunny number 6 to go with my
Pop art
my
collection.
pop art. I actually even let me see if I can find it.
Eisman did gag cartoons for New Jersey Bell Telephone during 1960.
I don't remember if I showed this. That I did the print of the Millie the Model one. I'm still working on the other one. But I did a print of Vanguard. I think I showed this last week. The Al Williamson Vanguard Illustrated, too.
Yes.
Just because it was such a clean cover, it took me almost nothing to make a print out of it because it was just so clean.
What, he's still working on it? It can't be him working. Oh my God, he is.
The cover says, "I'll be a modern wife." We all know what that means.
Oh, Hy Eisman's profile. It's pretty good.
Just married, just divorced.
Hy Eisman did Cats and Jammer Kids from 1986 to 2006.
Oh, wow.
And he's been doing Popeye since 1994.
Oh wow. Okay.
And is 95 and still working?
Wow. The Charlton Hot Rod books were awful. Charlatan. Yeah, there's the other one. Especially after reading cartoons. Oh, yeah. 1968 is colorful. It sure is. And sexy.
Oh, they were all in bikinis.
Ooh, Just Married ran to 114 issues. Let's see. Read Bunny, Slab Just Married, Read Rip Tippy Team. Finally, somebody not ripping Just Married. All right. All right, James. He's slabbing Just Married. That's a lot. Yeah, I'm gonna have to find that bunny now. I wonder if it exists on eBay.
And who published the Tippy Teen?
Tower Comics.
Power, I think he said, right?
Yeah.
It's
I
weird.
think it was obligatory to have it.
It was what?
I think it was obligatory, let's say, to have a kids comic in your line because Tower was, of course, better known for Thunder Agents. But
Reed Paolo, Slab Wilson, Rip Chris because he's not here, and Dolphin Jared. Now here's a pretty cool MC Escher cover on this month's Ice Cream Man. We all know this MC Escher playing with perspective stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess what's his name here wanted to do it this month. Bunny is $20 for very good, or $5 at my count. Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah,
I'll have to put that on my wish list. I paid, I think, $25 for Millie the Model, and $8 for that Laugh comic, which is not in good shape. But there were no in good shape comics. But Ice Cream Man is different every issue and strange every issue. This one was kind of straightforwardly weird. This one is the story of a guy in rehab trying to get through rehab. And the kind of the horror ice cream element is just besides the drugs, which are a horror to him. This crazy demon keeps showing up and talking to him. And the Ice Cream Man in various forms just ends up being around, just kind of there as a, I don't know, a warning, as a, you don't make it through this rehab, the Ice Cream Man's going to get you kind of thing. So it was a different sort of issue. Oh, there's the Ice Cream Man is driving him home in the cab. So we don't know if he's going to make it or not, because they keep saying only 10% of people who go to rehab make it their first time or something like that. So it was a book all about, wanting to he didn't want to go to rehab, but he ended up there. But always an enjoyable story, always a good story. There's no. I wonder how many people are sticking around with the series now that it's like there's no overarching story to Ice Cream Man. There's no. In the beginning, they kind of hinted at a backstory for Ice Cream Man, and a big story arc, but they've just completely gotten away from it. They just tell whatever story they want each issue, which I appreciate. I'm fine with that. But I wonder how many other people were disappointed that they didn't continue with an overarching story and left it. I don't know. It's just a thought that comes to mind whenever I read Ice Cream Man, because most people want that big story. They're not okay with each issue just being its own thing. As many people as you hear complain about, oh, comic book stories need more done-in-ones. Oh, comic book stories shouldn't be so complicated and long. When you put out a one-issue thing, people don't like it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's hard to know what. Well, it's hard to know what people like anyway.
Yes, yeah,
Because
it's a crapshoot.
yeah, it's definitely a crapshoot. And it's kind of hard to like sometimes even gear what people like on the internet, because I know if I don't like something, I shut it off. I don't go to it
Right,
anymore. But then there are people who go to it every week
right,
just so they, I think it's just really so they can have content and be able
right.
to talk about something. And unfortunately, negative stuff seems to work better. But
And
to me,
often the loudest people don't represent the majority.
true, exactly. So something like, to me, I don't know if I would enjoy that kind of a story, but I think if I was to pick up the book not knowing what it was anyway, I would be interested in it for a couple of issues and then
Right.
make my decision. Like anything else, really.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
sometimes you don't know if a book's going to be good until after the third issue.
Oh,
Anyway,
definitely.
especially if it's something brand new and they got to set up the world, and set up what's going on. So I think like with anything else, that might be just a weird enough story, and who knows, maybe
Yeah.
after reading it for a while you realize maybe there is an overarching story, or as you mentioned before, they might have intended to but then decided, oh, they're having more fun not
Right.
keeping it
Oh,
connected, because
I
sometimes
definitely.
keeping everything connected can be a pain
Right.
in the ass in itself.
One of the things I like about the book is the writer and artist are obviously having fun. They really enjoy doing these Ice Cream Man stories because, once again, they put a lot of thought into it. You can tell.
Right.
There's a certain level of there's a pretty high level of sophistication in Ice Cream Man conceptually. The one, but there's also a simplicity to it, like when they did a Dr. Seuss story, and the whole story was told like the whole issue was told like a Dr. Seuss story. Now there's actually something very unsophisticated about that, because it's just, oh, we want to do a Dr. Seuss story, and it's not that hard to do a Dr. Seuss story. You don't have to think about it that deeply. But other stories they did, you have to think about more, which they've done too. So they can kind of go unsophisticated and sophisticated, all while being sort of high concept, elevator pitch stuff. We're going to do Ice Cream Man as an early Spider-Man story. They can give you an elevator pitch and make it simple or sophisticated. So it's an interesting book. It really is.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as creators, you would get an idea that wasn't going to really go that far. It's just a story to tell that's not going to be, because not all stories have to be a continuation
Right,
and
right.
span 84 issues.
Yeah,
Sometimes you want to tell a little story, maybe a heist story
right.
that you have that doesn't really, once the heist is over, that kind of story is over, and it doesn't necessarily fit into a larger tale. So here's
Mhm.
my idea for this particular story. Here's a heist that takes place, and then that's it. I don't want to tell any more. It's just I happen to have this concept of a story, and it only will fit in 22 pages, and that's it.
Yeah.
So that might be that kind of a thing where, they might have wrote down a bunch of stories, and it's like, oh, this could work here. So it's like an anthology without being an anthology because they're
Yeah.
individual issues.
Ice Cream Man is one of the strongest concepts in modern comics. I've not heard people shitting on it, but I do get how it might not outsell the capes. Yeah, I haven't heard anyone shitting on it either, King's Poet. But I just wonder if some people just kind of quietly dropped off. Paolo, is Tex worth reading? An English version hardcover just came out this week. Tex and the Land of the Seminoles.
Text is predictable, but well-rounded.
Okay.
Of course, being predictable is what happens when your comic has existed for 800 issues.
It's tough to surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was created back in 1951, and it's been published monthly ever since in Italy.
Wow, that is a long time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of long stories, Manifest Destiny is about to end. This is issue 47. We only have issue 48 left, so we get to use the word penultimate. And it's been good stuff all along. It's the Lewis and Clark expedition, except there's monsters they keep finding. And now they've reached the end of their expedition on the California coast, and they have to make a deal with a monster. But it's not going as planned. And next issue, we'll see if the plan works out or not. But it's just been a fun book, a fun ride, good artwork. Who's doing it? Chris Dingus, Matthew Roberts, and Owen Gienny. Owen Gienny is the colorist. Matthew Roberts is the artist, and the color is as much a part of the art as anything, as in a lot of modern comics. The colorist really takes over a lot of the job that the inker used to do, setting the mood, just a really good job coloring. Got a sort of watercolorish style, the whole thing, which fits in with the Lewis and Clark era in watercolor. So it's just been a terrific book. And Pat Brousseau is the letterer on it, a Marvel bullpenner from the 80s, just before I was there. Good letterer. I've enjoyed this. I can't remember when it first came out. Over 5 years ago now, because I think it's taken hiatuses. I don't know the first, but I've been buying this one for 47 issues, so I'll be sad to see it go. Have to find something to replace it, but. Well-rounded and predictable. High praise, says Graphic Man. That's a 400-page oversized book. Wow.
Yeah, well, if it's not too expensive, do give it a try. I'm seeing that the art is made by Michele Rubini. So yeah, it should be interesting.
Yeah. With everyone going digital, is inking still a thing? It is on occasion, but not as omnipresent as it once was. Like I said, coloring has taken over a lot of the chores inking used to do. Not always. Sometimes that's why coloring lets us down, when they expect the colorist to do the heavy lifting, and the colorist either isn't capable or doesn't have the time to.
There's not much time on things, because people think once you go digital, it will save time, and it doesn't. Coloring was a lot quicker and easier when it was by hand than it is digitally. I could take a page and color it within an hour when I was doing it by hand, but on a computer it could take up to 6 hours. 2 of those are just setting up the pages, really, planning it, getting prepared, and what have you. So computer is just another tool, and artists that are able to gravitate to it, the art style will still shine through once that particular artist really knows how to use the tool. And there's some people that still work traditionally and just scan it in and send it in. So I think it's one of those things, is that with everything, there'll be someone that's going to pop up and be like the greatest digital inker, if they haven't shown up already. And I think that goes with all different tools and stuff like that. Because I get questions from kids asking, what's the best tablet, and it's like doesn't really is what you're comfortable with. I know someone who puts together his comic book on an iPad. They just figured out how to use all the tools
Oh,
in
iPads,
that kind of a way.
as Jeff Sebesta once said, Wacom tablets are the best because they got in early and got all the good patents. And having tried out a couple of other tablets since then, they're a lot twitchier than the Wacom tablets. They just are. I guess because they don't have all the good patents. But the iPad is terrific. I like the iPad even better than the Wacom tablets. They got their stuff down. I would rather draw on an iPad than on a Wacom tablet. That's how good they have it. With the Apple Pencil and the tablet and Procreate. Mm-hmm. But also another reason that coloring used to be faster is the color separation time used to be built in, and the editors had no control over it. Because it's like the color separation time used to have to be done at some print shop before the digital age, where it was cut by hand. And in order to make your deadline, you had to have the coloring in by October 10th. Now, since the actual separations are done by the colorist now, who isn't just doing guides, that deadline got pushed forward, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, now if our colorist can get it done in half the time, that means we start to make our deadline. So it's up to the colorist now to make a different deadline than it used to be. The deadline is closer. All of a sudden, they can bring the colorist right up to the print date, which isn't always good for the colorist.
No, not at all.
Jared, I came across a Dark Horse book recently that seemed like something you'd like. The Young Cynics Club, Slice of Life from 1993, Glenn Wong. I remember that name, but I've never read it. I'll have to write that one down. Young Cynics Club, 1993. Yeah, that sounds like something I might like. Color takes the most time in any of my process. Drawn ink and brush in an hour per page. Color 6 hours. Wow. Yeah, it can take a while, depending on your process. Let's see, another new nostalgia book that came out, Creepshow. 5-issue mini of horror stories. I think there's a new Creepshow magazine or TV show. That's why this one's here. And one story is by Chris Burnham. Another story by Paul Dini, Stephen Langford, and John McCrae is the artist. Good, fun stuff. The first story was more horror than the second one. But it's about as you expect from, EC Comics like horror stories. Except, like I said, the first story, there was no happy ending. The second story, there was a happy ending. First story, no happy ending. But I put this on my pull list just because I like the people involved. I like anthologies, want to buy some horror stories.
Did you say who was publishing that?
That's an Image. Right?
Oh, it's Image? Okay.
Let me double check. Image and Skybound. So it's Kirkman.
Oh, okay.
He found it in the dollar bill. Reminded me of Love and Rockets ripoff. Oh, okay. Really enjoyed the color on that Rain Kicks. Rain Like Hammers book. Yeah, Rain Like Hammers was excellent. Some nice color on that one. That was a good book. What's his name? All of a sudden I can't remember his name. Oh, well. Rain Like Hammers. I reread that one this year, too. Want to do another Reed, Rip, and Slab? Let's see. I got another one ready to go here. What year do we got? Ooh, all from the same month, 1942. All from the same company, Marvel.
Ooh.
I hit settings. It might be the all Alex Schomburg one. I'm not sure. I just glanced at them. Share screen, window, share. There we go. All winners, number 6. Captain America Comics, number 20. Marvel Mystery Comics, number 37. Woo.
Ooh.
Green and yellow.
Wow.
There's a triple threat for you. Let's see. Cap is in 2 of them. Submariner's in all 3. Human Torch is in 2. Bucky's in 2. How do you decide on this one?
That's a hard one to decide.
Brandon Graham is our Rain Like Hammers guy that I couldn't name. King's Poet's already there. Let's see. Read Captain America. Slab all winners. Tear Marvel. Ooh. Rip winners. Slab America. Read Marvel. Okay. By the way, I have always... All Winners Squad has always been one of my favorite names for a comic. Because they're telling you right there, you're not beating them.
They're all winners.
We are all winners in this squad. There are no losers to be found. Your squad's probably got some losers on it. But the All Winners Squad does not.
This is 1942.
Yep.
Are all 3 of them by different houses?
No, they're all Marvel. No, they're all Marvel.
No. What I mean is, who's putting the books together at this point? Are they?
No,
already...
Marvel have a. They all. Tamley has a bullpen, but they just fired Kirby and Simon and Kirby, so Stan's in charge.
Okay, because I'm just curious on how different each of the trade dresses are. So I was curious because of that. I would. I'm going to read All Winners. I'm going to slab Captain Marvel, and I'm going to rip Marvel Comics.
Captain America, you mean? You're going to slab.
I'm going to slab Captain America.
Right.
Yeah. So read All Winners, slab Cap, rip Marvel.
Let's see. Saul is going to rip Captain, read Winners, and slab Marvel. Let's slab Cap, read All Winners, rip Marvel. So we get all sorts of slab All Winners, read Marvel Mystery, rip Captain. Ooh. All those need dolphining to make them interesting. I think I'd put the dolphin on the right where Captain America is in the All Winners Squad. That way the dolphin is leading the All Winners Squad.
I would put the dolphin on the Captain America cover as Captain America, so the dolphin is fighting Nazis.
You wouldn't want him throwing a Nazi dolphin?
Oh, I didn't even think of that. What if they were all Nazi dolphins and Captain America's fighting them?
Captain America fighting Nazi dolphins.
Okay. So I finally decided, and I'm going to slab All Winners, read Marvel, and rip Captain America.
Whew, I think I'm going to have to slab All Winners, just because, like I said, it's my favorite title. I think if I have All Winners slabbed, that makes me a winner too, mister. I'm hanging with the All Winners Squad wherever I go. And I am... Do you know Captain America was the one Marvel comic that was on my pull list for the longest?
Was it?
I had... By the mid-'80s, there were no Marvel or DC comics on my pull list anymore, except for Captain Marvel. I read Captain Marvel all the way to like 96 when Lob Liefeld took it over. That's when I finally dropped it from my pull list. But yeah, I read all the Grunwald issues. and the issues that came after him too. But yeah, so I think I'm gonna have to read Captain America, slab all winners, and that'll leave me ripping up Marvel Comics.
Marvel Comics probably has the best collection of characters in the story, in the book. So yeah, we have you.
Frankly, all our nationalistic, jingoistic crap. Go America. Well, it was World War II. I'll have Dolphins as the firing squad in Marvel Mystery.
Because Marvel Mystery still has Jimmy Jupiter and Terry Vance Boy Detective strips, but all winners as the Destroyer, which was probably the second best design Marvel had in the 1940s.
I remember him from Roy Thomas bringing him back in the Invaders. He did look cool. He had like a zipatone costume.
I like how the mystery is just right on the comics.
Yeah.
Just design-wise, it's just...
Here we have
Nobody knows why they changed the name from Marvel Comics to Marvel Mystery Comics with number 2.
One single dolphin hanging out in the doorway of Marvel taking a pot shot. Slab cap, read all winners, rip Marvel Mystery. Ooh. I was heartbroken when they brought Kirby back and he was doing covers for Captain America, but the artwork inside was someone else and awful.
Both all winners and Marvel Mystery have text stories by Mickey Spillane.
Oh,
really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mickey Spillane worked for Marvel in the 40s. He wrote some Human Torch and Captain America stories as well. And he created Jeff Buster Johnson, I think.
The story turned into the Falcon and was a creation of the Red Skull. I was done after that. I never really understood Captain America. Do we have a Captain Newfoundland? We do have a Captain Newfoundland here, so.
Well, Captain Newfoundland would be most likely to fight dolphins.
Because there was always two Captain Americas at Marvel growing up, me reading. He was kind of like Batman in that there was a Captain America in his solo book and a Captain America in the Avengers. And really? There's a Captain Newfoundland? How does Comic Crack not know about that? He's from Canada.
Yeah, but he has Captain Winnipeg.
But one of the reasons I found a lot of the Avengers writers didn't get Captain America. Captain America and the Avengers was always kind of the authority figure who they made the asshole, who like Hawkeye rebelled against, or someone of that. There was always Avengers like rebelling against Captain America's authority, which made Captain America the authority figure. What I liked about Grunwald's Captain America, and why I was like one of the only people reading it, was that Grunwald's Captain America was his effect on other people. It wasn't that Captain America was some sort of goody-goody Boy Scout. It was that other people who were around Captain America wanted to be better versions of themselves because of Captain America. Which is why Grunwald always had like reformed villains in his cast, or villains who were trying to reform, because Captain America, not like that, like in the Avengers, Captain America was this guy who was always, an authority figure who would sometimes preach to the other Avengers. He never did that in his own book as Grunwald. He always just acted better. He led by example. He never expected other people to have to follow and do what he did. But when they did, he was happy about it. And people wanted to when they were around him. That's what I liked about Grunwald's Captain America, and other people's Captain America too, that was part of. But that's what people who didn't get Captain America didn't get. See, yup, comics and everything. He has a Newfoundland map for a face. Holy shit.
He does have
Forever, and it looks amazing. There's also Captain Canada. Him and Captain Newfoundland are buddies. Sent you a pic on Twitter, Jared. Let me see here.
I'm also fascinated by the fact that I'm only now noticing that how different color scheme Captain America's shield was in the 40s.
It looks a little pink on that cover.
Well, no, it's more of that it's red and blue, where the modern one is red and red.
Yeah, and the costume doesn't have red and white stripes on the back. It's just the star and blue.
Comic Crack may have sent it to me, but it didn't come through on Twitter.
Because when I went to go look at other covers from that time, it's like, is the shield done correctly? And it was done correctly for that time period.
Yeah.
But completely different by the time he comes.
It's got a different color scheme now, doesn't it? That's what you just said?
Yeah. Yeah, there's just 3 stripes around the blue center with the star, and red, white, red. So no blue on the outside.
No blue stripe on the outside. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. It is a good costume, even with that giant A on the forehead. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But it looks good. You know, why would someone put a giant A on their forehead? That's why everyone wants to redesign that A out of there. But the spot of white is what works. I think the hardcover book of Newfoundland or Canada was done by Frank Frazzetto. Whoa. That was a good one. You know?
What I found weird is it in Submariner's design, back in the 40s, he had brown hair. And the Speedo actually looked like a real Speedo instead of the scaly bathing costume.
All right, I may as well use the last one up that I have.
Oh, so and the Human Torch had a blue costume in the first 4 issues.
Blue costume. I remember him. I think when they brought him back in the FF to maintain the copyright, didn't he have a blue costume?
No. What they did was give Johnny Storm a red costume with the.
That's what I'm thinking of. Okay.
Yeah.
They gave Johnny Storm a red costume. Here's 1998 September weird stuff I never bought. Batman 1 Million, Daredevil She, and P.I. The Book of Ants #1. What the heck?
That's
the
pie. Pronounced pie.
Oh, pie. Oh, that's pie. Oh, that's right. There's the pie symbol. I see now. Pie, the Book of Ants #1. I thought he was a PI, a private investigator. She Daredevil Bonsai Edition #1. So these are all first issues. They must be worth $1 million by now.
Yeah.
I'm sure I have the She, and I'm positive, or at least I had the Batman. Pie's a new one. I never heard of that one. I would read Pie because I don't know anything about it. I would slab the She Daredevil. I think that would be the one that would be worth something in the future. And I'll rip the Batman.
Yeah, same. I had zero interest in that 1 million
now we all know
storyline.
Jared's Twitter information.
I tried to put that. Tippy Teen. How did I get back to that? I tried to put the picture from Twitter in there, but it just somehow opened up that. That's weird. Well, let me open it in Photoshop then. Good old Photoshop. It does everything. Well, let's see. What would I'm going to rip Batman just because I want to rip a Batman. Let's see. Read Pie, rip She, slab Batman. Everyone wants to slab Batman. Read Pie, rip Daredevil. Read Ants, slab Dee Dee, rip Batman. All right, it's with me ripping Batman. Read Pie, rip Batman. All right, 3 ripping Batmans. The Pie is based off the movie by Darren Aronofsky. No, it can't be. I remember that movie, but they made a comic book adaptation of it.
Yep. Here it is.
Wow, that is
Here it is.
crazy. I had no idea. The movie was great. I remember liking it. I don't know if I'd call it great.
28 pages, script by Darren Aronofsky, so it's probably direct adaptation.
Is there only
And
one?
art by Edward Ross Flynn.
Are there more issues of it?
No, it's a one-shot.
A one shot? Man, it must be a tie-in with the book somehow, like rather than an adaptation, because I don't think you could do the movie in 28 pages.
Yeah, maybe it was a
And
prequel. Those were big in '98.
I lost it again. There we go.
We had a lot of prequel stories going on. Independence Day had a prequel.
Yeah, it could have been a prequel.
Mission Impossible had a prequel.
Well, now I'm gonna have to read Book of Pie. No, I'm gonna slab Book of Pie. I don't care. I don't want to read it. I'm gonna slab Book of Pie because I like that goofy cover. Because there's no way I can slab She Daredevil. I just can't. And I want to rip Batman, which means I have to read She Daredevil. Oof.
Your own rules. Now,
Bonsai edition can only mean it will rip itself.
oh, and that She Daredevil was a variant cover.
Ooh.
So you need to slab it because instead of $1 million, it's going to be worth $2 million. It's a variant.
the 1 million story, I think they took place in the future.
Oh, Photoshop.
Yeah.
What's going
in
on?
the 853rd century.
Huh. Oof. The hard part is figuring out where to put the dolphin.
Ooh, the dolphin. I forgot
Yeah.
about the dolphin. Oh, no.
We replace all the ants with dolphins? Just tiny little dolphins? Or have
I'm
a
gonna-
Ants
dolphin
with dolphins.
And I'm going to put a dolphin in Batman's costume. Because in the 853rd century, dolphins are going to be the highest life form on Earth.
And one
And one of them is going to dress up as a bat. Yeah. Dressed up as a bat.
Yeah,
Finally, there's Captain Newfoundland. But first, let me figure out where I'm going to put that dolphin. Where'd it go? There we go.
that cover for Captain Newfoundland looks like an innovation book.
Oh, the dolphin's going in the Batman costume. Cape and cowl on a dolphin. Tail sticking out the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm putting the dolphin.
Okay, so Captain Newfoundland is in the Green Comics database.
The Book of Pie for dolphins? The Book of Dolphins? Is there a dolphin already between Elektra's legs? Could be right there, you know? The Book of Pie is in the the Captain Newfoundland. Look at that logo. They're getting fancy with the perspective on that logo, and he's just fading. What were his powers? That he was invisible in the body, but not his cape?
So there's just a skeleton information on the Green Comics database.
Just a blowhole, gee. There's not a dolphin between her legs.
That's not Elektra. That's Billy Tucci's she.
That's right. We forgot. We already forgot what generic-looking woman who she was. By the way, 2 last comics for the week I got. Usagi Yojimbo, always good. An end to the story of the ninja bats, always good. And the comic I never thought I'd like, Miss Meow #4. Another solid cheesecake adventure. Of, like I said, it reminds me of The Boy's Light. where it's all about sort of the interaction between these superhero mercenaries. It just doesn't have the, Garth Ennis edge of The Boys, nowhere near it. I was in his fan club, but I can't remember. He had a few comics and some live action TV stuff. That's, I guess, the Book of Pie. Yeah, I remember when the Book of Pie was hot. I may have even bought the DVD back when DVDs were cheap and it was first coming out. But I cannot for the life of me remember. And my DVD collection is long buried in a closet somewhere, having gone digital with everything. I probably have it digitally too, The Life of Pi. There was like a guy in a room figuring out numbers, if I remember correctly.
Never heard of it.
What year did it come out? 90, I guess the same year as that comic, 98 or 97?
Probably.
To space and back. Everybody's laughing at Comic Crack. It's like he's on crack.
Fan club. You guys ever been part of a fan club?
I was once in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, in the Johnny Lightning fan club.
Oh, okay.
It was back when I was collecting Matchbox cars or Hot Wheels cars, just because they were cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And they had like these, but then they kept like every other collection. They just kept getting more expensive until I went, forget it. They used to be able to collect and get them for $1. Johnny Lightnings were like $3. They were the expensive ones. This is like the late 90s.
Yeah, I bought Johnny Lightnings back then.
They just kept putting out more and more expensive cars for the collectors. And I was like, I don't want to spend $10, $20, $30 on a little Hot Wheels car. I just don't. But I did for like a month get a tin with a special Johnny Lightning car in it. But I think it cost like $20 to be in the club. Right. And you got one car. I was like, you know what? One car is enough for me. And
I had joined Wham when it was
Marvel
out.
Marching Society. Boom.
Boom's a nice one too. So
Wham?
I had joined Wham, which was Wild something of Marvel.
Oh yeah.
It was called Wild Action of Marvel, something like that. I don't recall what it was. I joined, and I got a letter that said they're discontinuing the membership, and so they gave me some covers that wasn't attached to the comics. So I think it was just somebody in the office just grabbed a pile of stuff,
pile of make-readies,
stuck them in a bag, and was like, here you go. I think I got as far as getting a button for joining. It's like I joined, I filled out whatever form it was, sent it in, got a button, and then the next letter I got is that Wham is no longer around. And then while I was at Marvel, we attempted to create a fan club.
Mm-hmm.
So I came in with a whole book of ideas and concepts that were all like, we can't do any of that. There's no way to do any of that. And my idea was that Marvel is licensed with everything. Right. So we should have and I don't even know what acronym we were going to call it, if we were going to bring back FOOM and try it that way. But one of the things was that we're licensing everything. We should have something specially made for the fan club. So I was like, we should have an action figure.
Oh, you wanted to spend real money.
I wanted to spend, because again, I didn't know. I basically, this is the fan club I want. So it's like, okay, you become a member of the fan club. If we're going to ask people for money, we should give them something substantial. So as a fan, this is what I want.
Right.
So, talking about pins and buttons. It's like, I always did that. Stationery, bring back what was done with FOOM. Kind of combine stuff, and then what is brand new, what's never been done before. It's like, well, Toy Biz is huge. We do an action figure. We could get and I know, and there was a clothing line at one point. It was like, we should have a jacket, we should have this, that. Every idea was knocked down. And then now, if you join, you could get an action figure. It's like, you son of a bitches. I had that idea in the 90s, and he threw it away.
You wanted them to spend real money, and they did not.
Exactly.
Well, it could also be, but now the fan club is run by a third party. That's often what happens.
That's the other thing too, because eventually that was suggested. Because the thing was is that when they did the fan club in the beginning, it was in house. It was basically Flo running the fan club.
Right.
You know, and back then I guess it was a lot easier to do because they were just ordering stationery that they already had and just sticking it into an envelope. And then it was one of those things where it's like it only went as far as meetings when they realized there was no way that it would even be cost effective to have, because it would have to be a whole department on its own.
Right. What usually happens is some entrepreneur third party comes in and says, hey, how about we pay you X amount of money to so we can run your fan club? And the business goes, all right, let me sign, because that's just free money to them. And then that other person puts all that stuff together trying to make money and runs the fan club. That's so you're competing against that.
Yeah.
You're competing against this company wants to give us money so they can do a fan club, or we can spend money and possibly fail. No thanks.
But that was one of those things where it's like, hey, we should try to do this. And then once the reality set in, it was
no
like,
one wants to take that risk.
Yep.
I found a blog post about Wham written in 2012.
What was that?
I found a blog post about Wham.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Marvel's plans for the club depended upon comic stores to sell Wham to the public. The company apparently wanted to deal stores into Wham in a big way. Personal appearances by our costume characters such as Spider-Man and Wolverine. Prominent creator signings. Scheduled phone conference calls with Marvel editors or creators. None of which took place in any measurable sense.
Once again,
it stood for Wild Agents of Marvel.
Wild. I remember that now.
And the pin was a red and white pin that says Wham wants you.
They made bigger promises than they know.
So Wham membership kits no doubt went into storage, with the club itself falling to the floor with a sound effect much like its title.
I was in the old Mirage Ninja Turtles club, and Leonardo wrote back to me because I sent an April O'Neil picture of myself with X's and O's. I saved up and joined FOOM as a kid and still have the poster and issues, all of which have gone up in value ridiculously. Yeah, 62 Lefty Blues. I think FOOM, I was too young for FOOM. I think it may have just petered out in the late 70s when I was 10, being a big comic fan in 76, 77. Well, I'm getting punchy and tired, so we should call it a night so Paulo can get some rest.
Yeah, especially because I was up until 4 a.m. on Wednesday for the Fossils show.
I was starting a new fan club. I'd call it WAP, Words and Pictures. I think Frank Miller already started that fan club. It wasn't a fan club. It was like an industry thing. I thought Wilson meant he was in Wham fan club. Careless Whispers. Well, he does want you to wake him up before you go, but he was never officially in the club. Don't leave him behind.
It was my own club.
All right, so everyone have a good night.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye. Oh, Papa.